There we go.
So as Zach mentioned, I'm Jessica Lewis. I'm a senior consultant here at HJC. Zach and I co-pilot the strategic services side of the business. I've been at HJC for close to 4 years, loving every minute. A fun fact about me is I've run 3 marathons and most recently ran the New York Marathon and fundraised for Team for Kids, which was a great experience because it's always neat as a fundraiser to be on the other side and be fundraising myself and paying attention to all the communications that Team for Kids sent me, pre-marathon and post. So I'll turn over to Zach.
Yeah, so Jessica and I are calling from our Toronto headquarters today. That picture on the left is a picture of Jessica. She's not wearing the cool shades today, but still a very cool team member. This is me, and this is not what I look like anymore. As Jessica mentioned, I co-pilot Strategic Services business unit with Jess. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. We're going to talk a little bit in a second about some of the other things we do other than helping organizations think about holiday planning. I have never run a marathon, but my fun fact is that I'm a farm kid. So, I'm literally, well, I know we have some Canadians on the line, but we have people calling from all over. I'm from as rural Alberta gets, super small town. Didn't even know fundraising was something that I could do when I grow up, and I'm still trying to grow up, but I am now living right downtown Toronto, right next to our Toronto headquarters, working for HJC. So HJC does a lot of things. I know we had a little peek at the registration list today. I know we have a handful of clients on the call today and some new faces as well, so welcome, old and new. HJC is a full-service agency that focuses only on nonprofit and charity clientele. So we've been around for quite a while. Mike Johnston, our founder, actually wrote the very first book in online fundraising. We still have a copy in the office. I think it's pretty funny. It comes with a floppy disk. So it's a little bit of a testament to how far we've come as an agency and as a sector and as just, people on the planet leveraging and using and relying on technology. As the agency's grown over the years, since the early 90s, we've kind of become the go-to when it comes to, digital executions and strategy, but we also operate as a full-service agency. So we've got, our designers in-house, our developers in-house, and our strategists, and we help organizations with everything from integrated marketing planning to change management, strategic executions, etc.
So this is just a screenshot of some of the clients that we work with. We work with all different sizes of clients, so from small shops to some of the leading nonprofits across the globe. So for example, we've worked with Greenpeace International, we've worked with CAMH Foundation here in Toronto. I've done work with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital out of the States. And the neat thing about our shop as well is we work across verticals. So from animal welfare to higher ed to health and disease. So we really gain a good perspective across the sector.
Yeah, so our job always is to be aware of the constant research and tests that are happening out in the sector and finding ways that we can help share those learnings across our clientele. HJC has grown to, couldn't even tell you the number right now, somewhere around 35 staff around the world. I would say globally we probably have about half of our work coming out of the United States, probably 40% of our clientele here in Canada, and another 10% in the United Kingdom, Australia, around the world. So that is the who are we, and now for the real reason why you are all here is we'd like to start a conversation about planning your holiday campaigns. And it might seem early, but winter is coming.
This is just a fun picture that we found, which, it's always not fun to think about snow here in Toronto.
Feels like summer just got here.
Yes, exactly. But, as soon as we know it, we're going to be quickly into the holiday season.
And while we know and we help organizations with campaigns year-round, holiday is something, it's a different beast entirely, and it's super important. We actually just did a little online search over the past week of some of the studies that have been done, and these are some of the statistics that we were able to find. These ones are North America specific. The first two, the stats come from Canada, and the last one is American, but this is why, part of the reason it becomes so important to start right now.
Yeah, and I think we'll just call out a few of them. So, in December, the average donation amount increases by 65%. So that's huge. So it's obviously, as you know, a really great time of the year to take advantage of people that are more prone to give over the holidays. The last 3 days of December bring in 10.6% of annual donations, which is huge.
So again, these are two statistics that represent a data set from some research that's been done. Mm-hmm. For every organization, it's going to vary. These are reported in aggregate, but definitely a time to be focusing.
Yeah, and then the last stat is just, donors who gave first in December had a 3-year cumulative value that's 51.8% higher than donors in the other 11 months. So just showing when we're looking at lifetime value and looking at, donors that we can acquire and then really steward and donors that can become loyal long-term donors, this is a key time of year to cultivate these people. And then this just shows, looking at dollars, across, on an annual basis, 33.3% of online giving is happening in December versus, 66.7% for the rest of the year. So just, further justifies why it's so important to plan early because it's such an important time of the year from a fundraising perspective, which I'm sure all of you know.
And something that we really want to hone in on today, we're going to be going through a lot of tips and tricks and things we've seen and learned. I think this chart in itself speaks to a couple of different things. This combined with a statistic from the previous page. We always really want to be thinking about that long-term value and how can we build relationships that are profitable for organizations around year-round. For me, this makes me think of two different things. It makes me think about, from a long-term value perspective, are we generating more funds in December because this is the time that we're asking more, or is this the time that people really do have more of an affinity towards giving? I would guess that the answer is a little bit of both, and that's why we want to focus on, bringing best practices from year-round annual campaigns into the holiday time and kind of removing a little bit of that tunnel vision, but also understanding that this is a super important time for us to be bringing in year-end revenue, and how can these two things match together. So the first part of what I just said is what we will be, if you remember back to that kind of table of contents agenda, the first thing that we really want to think about is campaign planning overall and how this fits when we're talking about year-end. I'll be speaking, kind of wearing my voice out for the next couple of slides, talking about that campaign planning. And after that, I'll be passing the talking stick over to Jessica, who's going to walk us through some of the things that we really want to underline as important things to remember as you move forward with your planning. Apologies, got a sensitive mouse here today. So as with any campaign, and again, the reason we want to start here and highlight is oftentimes, we get stuck as organizations in this model of tradition where we know, okay, at holiday we always send out our direct mail, we send out this many emails, we might get these ads out, certain things. And it's really easy, especially when it's holiday, because, from our experience working with other organizations, you start to think about it really a little bit differently because it's the end of the year, because it's usually a big chunk of your budget and planning energies. But what's really important, as with any campaign, is to take a step back before you ever even start, entering the market or even planning, and say, what are our goals? What can we do? What can we define in advance so that we can say at the end of the holiday campaign, okay, this was a really great job. And these goals, we'll get into this in a minute, need not be strictly revenue-based. We really need to define what our key KPIs are in advance, or our key performance indicators. Is this campaign an opportunity for us to re-engage a lapsed file? is this an opportunity for us to look at, broader business objectives? Whatever those goals may be, let's ensure that they're smart. So, are they specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound? What can we do? Are we looking to increase a certain, response rate by a certain percentage by the beginning of 2017? These are certain things that we really want to think about before we proceed. We often hear at this point in the conversation, I don't know, it's just time to make money. Let's make as much money as we can. Absolutely, that's always the goal. We also, we want to be thinking about lifetime value. We want to be thinking about how we can not only acquire and retain and cultivate and steward and convert as donors. We want to think about this, and convert donors. We want to think about this kind of as a broader kind of interlocking plan that looks at all of these business objectives. And then something that's really, look at what you did last year. Look at your own benchmarks and say, okay, what did we do last year? What are our learnings? What are those benchmarks against which we want to measure our success? Organizations will often, as a sector, we're pretty strapped, and we are often operating last minute with limited resources, whether that be budget or people or time, really. And so we've kind of developed this tendency to rely on third-party benchmarks that come out and tell us, if you're working in the cancer vertical, this is what your response rate should be. Or if you're working, in animal welfare, these are the percentage points you should be looking at. Something that we really try to urge our clients to do is start to develop, and I know some of you on the phone already have, start to develop your own owned benchmarks, your own owned data, so that moving forward, if you haven't already, you can start to make decisions based on your organization's own business analytics. Benchmarks at a sector level are fantastic and let us know what our neighbors are doing, but at the end of the day, our files are the ones that we need to be in charge of, and we need to own, and we need to grow. And so it's super important for us, if you're not at a place where you can create a SMART goal or KPI-driven strategy or objective at the outset, ask yourselves, what do we need to do during this campaign? What data do we need to be monitoring and collecting so that we have those business analytics moving forward to help inform future decisions? So that's kind of our what is our objective piece. Once we really have defined what it is that we need to achieve with this campaign, now's our time to think about who our audience is. And this is, at a high level, something that we are starting to see change across the sector. Generally speaking, when you start a conversation with an organization about this, they may say, our audience is pretty standard for the sector. It's kind of a middle-aged woman, potentially living downtown or in the suburbs. She's interested in these things. That's great. But one of the exciting things about the fact that we're now talking about planning into 2017 is that all of the tools that your organizations are using, whether you're using them, to the maximum potential or not, all of them come with these pretty sophisticated analytics functionalities. And so we can start to not just look at who our target audience is or who our prospects are. We can start to bucket them individually or in smaller segmented groups or personas. And so we can start to say, perhaps our value proposition as an organization is something fairly broad. Maybe we're trying to cure cancer. Maybe we're trying to ensure that, and these are the two examples that I'll just kind of bounce between, but I know there's a diversity of organizations reflected. But maybe another value proposition is we're trying to, protect all animals from neglect. That being, even if that is your organizational value proposition, there may be buckets that we can further hone in on within that target population. Some of this may be done through advanced survey work. It might be done by looking at, your social profile analytics if you use Facebook, and you might start to say, okay, yes, at a high level, our organization exists to eliminate animal abuse, but it might also, within that, you may realize that one thing that a subsection of your target audience, resonates more closely with is animal adoption, or something else that your organization does that maybe at a high level isn't your overall value proposition, but is a piece of what your mission delivery is, and maybe there are opportunities to create little sub-campaigns that focus on these and speak specifically to those target audiences. Another thing before we fully define who our target audience is, we go back to those objectives. And so if we are saying, our objectives are definitely to raise as much money as possible, but we're going to do so by, reactivating a lapsed portion of our file while also finding new donors while, upgrading many of our one-time givers to monthly, we may start to realize that those different needs will take the shape of a handful of different audiences as well. So here's our opportunity to say, what is our strategy for the lapsed people on file versus those who've never even heard of us? And is there, once those audiences are defined, an opportunity to become a little bit more sophisticated with how we're creating the campaign's value proposition? So now we've thought about our objectives, we've thought about our audience, and now we really need to start talking about our timing. This is, again, kind of the theoreticals that are going to underpin the rest of today's webinar. There's a lot of exciting nuts and bolts coming soon, so stay excited and engaged. So if we know what we need to do and we know with whom, now's our time to think about the when. So when is the start and end of our campaign, and how are we going to essentially kick off? If you remember to kind of a few minutes ago, and this is something that you'll hear us at HJC speak about quite a bit, is this concept of lifetime value or lifetime engagement. We know historically our sector has been set up with this kind of donor-owner mentality, and that's just because of the way our organizations have been set up. And so you've got, people who are in charge of maybe your annual program, people who are in charge of, your major giving program, people who are in charge of your marketing and communications. That makes sense from a bureaucratic standpoint, but from a constituent standpoint, a constituent could be or a supporter could be anybody from, a one-time donor who eventually becomes a volunteer, who gets more inspired through volunteerism and becomes a monthly or regular donor, who then starts to move through this lifetime kind of relationship with you. Because if we start to think rather, or kind of change our paradigm from that donor-owner bureaucracy out model and start to think from a constituent-in model, our prospects and our donors might not all of a sudden go, oh, now it's the fall campaign, now it's the summer campaign, now it's the holiday campaign. That's the way we as professionals think about it. Let's flip that paradigm and say, maybe our holiday campaign can start in June because we are rolling out a lead generation campaign in July. We're going to share an example in a little bit about how those summer acquisition campaigns really, if intentionally done, become a really successful starting point for your holiday campaign. So is there an opportunity to start this summer, to start, in the fall around Thanksgiving, to really not wait until Giving Tuesday or not wait until the beginning of December to say, okay, now it's holiday campaign period. For your prospects, it's not necessarily a campaign, it's the organization that they believe in and support. So how do our campaigns as professionals link together in a way that thinks about that lifetime engagement value so that we're constantly able to be cultivating and working towards achieving our broader business objectives? Another really important reason why we want to start early, and this is that bottom point on the slide you're looking at right now, is we need to think about the content that we want to create. We know, as professionals, we know that people give to people. We know that if somebody, a prospect, a prospective donor or supporter can relate to your mission through the eyes of somebody who's being helped or through the eyes of another donor, they're oftentimes much more likely to be inspired to act or to give. And so are there, beneficiaries that we want to engage? Are there other donors that we want to engage to start collecting stories that make sense to share in a few months? And if the answer is yes, then we need to start yesterday. I know we have somebody from this organization on the phone today. This isn't a holiday campaign, but this is a really, this is a campaign that this is CAMH, so Center for Addiction and Mental Health. This is a campaign that started, really was only public facing about a month ago. But the work of collecting the stories of people who, are affected or who believe in this cause, that story collection happened months and months ago so that we could start to build relationships and start to understand why this is so important, or this cause becomes so important, or this campaign is so important to these individuals. And so if we can find ways to collect diverse stories and experiences and connections to the cause, then we know that those connections, as diverse as they are, will also represent the diversity of prospects out in the world, and will start to allow us to speak to unique value propositions that resonate with individuals across our target market. This is another example. So War Child Canada, that we worked with this or we continue to, but worked with this organization throughout the course of the past year. And one of the things that you see on the screen right now was a back to school campaign. So really a pledge campaign. It was an email acquisition campaign where we're looking at, collecting new leads, but providing offers back to these people to, stand up, share, opt into receiving communications with War Child Canada so that they can learn more about what they can do to make a difference. This was timed for September as a back to school campaign, and what we were able to do afterwards is, we had, once people signed this this pledge form, they would receive a couple of welcome emails explaining more about the mission, why. So this one was focused on education, so honing in on why education is so relevant at this time of year. We then, on the back end, were able to kind of keep those people separate, and when the holiday campaign came out, without doing any really any extra work, we just treated them as a separate segment. And while they received very similar communications, they may have started with, we know that you understand the importance of education because you supported us in September. Please take a moment to learn a little bit more now that it's December about why this is increasingly relevant, because not all kids did go back to school. Here's our holiday campaign. What we found is, in just a few short months, over 5% of the people who signed this pledge, who had never interacted with the organization before, converted to becoming a first-time donor during the holidays with an average gift over $100. So it's definitely an opportunity if you can have that high-altitude lens from the constituent standpoint, as opposed to chunking out your fall campaign against your holiday campaign. You can start to think about how that journey can operate and take shape throughout the year. So those are two quick examples that kind of speak to the planning process and how that can take shape. Jessica's got a couple of key points that we are constantly reminded of because they often get forgotten due to that holiday tunnel vision. And so as I promised, I will stop blabbing on right now, pass the talking stick over to Jessica as she walks you through a list of things you shouldn't forget about.
Perfect. So when thinking about your holiday planning, there's 5 key buckets that we'd like you to think about this year when it comes to planning out your campaigns. The first one is really kind of top level, looking at your objective for the campaign, which Zach spoke a little bit about earlier, but thinking about what are your main goals for the campaign, but also not just for the holiday campaign, but thinking a bit more broadly across the year. So, what are your organization's business objectives? Thinking about long-term value, how can you acquire new donors at this time, but ensure that they become long-term loyal supporters? So this image to the right is from a holiday campaign that we worked on with Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation. And it's a great example of how they really used the holiday time to drive acquisition. So in this example, they asked supporters to dedicate a dove online, and through that process, they were able to acquire new email addresses. So the donation, obviously you can see in the example, there's donate now, but the donation ask was secondary to really trying to acquire new supporters. Revenue really is key and important, obviously, because this is a big time of year in terms of bringing in fundraising dollars, but we want you to think about acquisition, stewardship, conversion. So even when you're acquiring these new supporters during the holiday time, what's next in terms of stewardship, and how can you really engage them and make sure that they're long-term loyal donors.
I think an exciting thing about this campaign too is while you see here, the dedicating a dove call to action being served more prominently than the donate one, a welcome series comes out, and we're cultivating people the second that they are dedicating that dove. And what we learned from this campaign is, revenue still came in from folks who followed that initial call to action that wasn't donation. We were able to provide them with an offer that connected them with individuals in their life and then connected those individuals to the mission. So it became a lot easier to create a personalized ask after that email was acquired.
So the second item that we really want you to think about is integration, and really thinking about the channels that you're integrating for your holiday campaign, but what makes sense on each platform. So, for example, can you leverage social media to create shareable content to really spread your cause and spread your brand's message? Or can you set up remarketing campaigns to link to direct mail? How can you really maximize all the channels that you're using, to make it a more cohesive campaign in the end? And I think, how can we improve performance across channels? So, even thinking offline, how can you leverage some of your volunteers who could help with a telemarketing or a telephone campaign? Thinking about social media, do you have ambassadors on social media that can help spread your message? Really, how can you integrate things cohesively? And I'm thinking about one of my clients that I worked with, the Redwood, a few years ago on their holiday campaign, specifically, leveraging symbolic giving. And I think it was a great example of integrating online and offline in terms of, I guess, really leveraging those channels.
Mm-hmm. I think, and something that Jessica mentioned briefly there, and that I'll focus on towards the end of today's chat, is when integration is done properly, it's not necessarily about just ensuring you're in every channel. It's about thinking of what are the best ways, if we've defined those objectives at the beginning, what are the best ways to leverage every channel we possibly can to reach those goals? And so the one little piece that Jessica spoke to is around what we will call custom audience matching, and it's something that I'll speak to in a minute. But if we're thinking about the fact that we know our direct mail is one of the ways that we're looking to re-engage a certain segment of our file during the holidays, how can we make sure that that direct mail program is as successful as possible by leveraging other channels? One thing we may choose to do is take that mailing list and match the people who will receive the direct mail to social profiles, and then serve the envelope creative to those folks the week prior to the direct mail drop. If we know that the envelope's only real job is to get opened, how can we make sure that people have seen that envelope on their computers before they've ever seen it in person? How can we ensure that it gets opened even more? These are things that we've tested and seen be quite successful in essentially saying, what can we do on Facebook to make our direct mail program more successful, for example.
And just to add to that, even also looking at your door-to-door campaign and the FSAs, and how can you use FSAs to also do retargeting online, and as Zach spoke about, how can you retarget online with online advertising, and it's just really connecting the dots across channels.
And for our American and global webinar attendees, FSA is the Canadian term for the first 3 letters of our postal codes, so zip codes or whatever you may use, kind of do the same thing.
So looking at e-cards, how can you leverage your e-cards? I'm sure most of you are already integrating e-cards into your holiday campaign. It can be a successful tactic as part of your donation process. But some people might be more prompted to actually complete the donation process if there's that option to send an e-card to a family member or friend as they make the gift. And I think more importantly is also from a lead generation perspective, how can you leverage e-cards for lead generation as the donor is sharing your message about your cause with the recipient of the gift. So again, it's just broadening that supporter base and that network.
Yeah, and eCards, it's a functionality that's built into a lot of donation platforms. So if you have one of those platforms, that's amazing. Use it. There are other opportunities, and we want to get through all of our content, so I'm not going to focus super in depth on it. But if this is something that's interesting to you and you don't necessarily have one of those platforms, there are online, programs that you can work with to integrate with your current forms. To kind of build in an eCard component, and we're happy to continue with that conversation. So reach out if that's something that's interesting to you.
So the fourth item we wanted to highlight is just don't stop testing. So it doesn't mean that you're testing out various marketing tactics throughout the year, and then you get to holiday and you stop testing. I think this is still a really great time to be testing. Testing out different subject lines. So maybe a more urgent appeal with a countdown, so 3 more days left to give, outperforms just a very general subject line. So really ensuring that you're testing subject lines, and then looking at testing copy and imagery. So, what images and photos are really resonating with your supporters. That you can test that out as well, and then also testing out CTAs, and even testing out where you're driving your emails. So are you driving, someone opens the email and you're driving them to a campaign landing page, or are you driving them directly to the donation form? What makes more sense from your organization's perspective? What's more successful? So I think just the message is keep testing during this time.
Yeah, it's really, this is something that we like to reiterate over and over again. Testing becomes this tool where you can test your way to success, right? You're doing these little tests along the way so that you're always improving your results. The reason sometimes organizations don't do it so much is because they think, or it's very true, we don't have enough time to do this, we just need to get the email out. A really interesting story from a current client of ours is, this client spends quite a bit of time focusing on building really, really compelling copy in their emails, and recently performed an A/B test where they had this super compelling email story, and that was one variable, and the other variable was just a picture of a beneficiary with a button that said, "Will you donate?" And they found that the picture performed quite a bit better. So in the long run, they're actually saving time by being able to, not necessarily focus on spending days and days writing this email when they know that a specific image might work better for that audience anyways. So it's just one of those things where you want to constantly, again, one of the things we want to reiterate is start now because now's the right time, but also start to build this more holistic culture of constituent-centric campaign planning that is agile and that has, a culture of testing behind it. So if you're not testing everything you do already, start now. And if you are, don't stop for the holidays. This is an example of, one of the organizations that we work with. This is not, so this I believe this was actually the 2014, but an example of a really smart test. Again, if you remember too, earlier in the webinar, we said third-party benchmarks are amazing. They're very good for a sector, but every organization's experience is going to be different. So, we see from those third-party benchmarks, or best practices, if you will, kind of a flip-flop around what's the best approach from an email. Do you send someone directly to the donation page, or do you send them to an intermittent landing page that can tell more of a story and share a video? Depending on what year it is, what month it is, and who's doing the research, the answer is never clear. And so if you can do both with your email file, chunk out 10% of the email file and send half of them version A and half of them on a user experience version B, and whatever one performs the best out of that 10%, roll the rest out to the remaining 90. There's no reason we can't constantly be testing, whether it be content or user flows. It's super important.
And this is just an example of a site that we use as a team here. It's really fun. You can go to whichtest1.com, and it's a nice little quiz. and you have to choose A or B, and then it pops up the answer. But it's just a fun tool as you're getting in the mindset of testing out different tactics.
Yeah, and I think this becomes especially important in the nonprofit sector, where we're almost always needing to rely on the professional experience of the folks who've been in our offices and in our sector for years and who've seen what works and what doesn't. This entire site, it's not nonprofit specific, but it's again one that we have a lot of fun with and encourage you to sign up so you get the weekly tests in your inbox. What's really cool is, oftentimes even, for us at the HAC office when we're doing this every day, our gut isn't always right. And it's always about, these are real-time completed tests where we can compare the results around our professional experience and what our gut feeling is. And I think one of the take-homes here is in a culture of constituent-centric testing, it's always data that's making the informed decisions, not us. And that data is informing what our gut reaction will be next time.
So the last item that we really wanted to hone in on is those last or the last emails that you send out that are specific to tax-related emails. So I think the one thing we really want to hone in on is don't forget to integrate this email with the rest of the email series and the rest of your campaign messaging, and make sure that it's cohesive versus just a short little email with that tax receipt kind of component. Really make sure it's integrated.
And this, I think, speaks again to what we know. And just to take a step back, there was a question here that came up around what is the CTA? Sorry, we're really bad at using those acronyms too often, but a CTA is your call to action. So would you donate? Would you consider volunteering? Those pieces, the donate nows, that's your CTA. Just to elaborate on what Jessica is speaking about, I mean, we do know that there is a proportion of our prospects or our supporters who are making donations because of, maybe not entirely or only because of, but because of, tax purposes. There's a huge opportunity, especially looking at that stat at the top of the screen, that 10% of annuals donations come in those last 3 days. Here's an opportunity to send out some messaging that says, you know what, if you want a tax receipt for this year, now's the time to make that donation. It adds that extra sense of urgency. But what we do see all too often is people or organizations only focusing on that, not linking it back to, yeah, you'll get your tax receipt, but you'll also be saving lives. You'll also be helping us, complete the mission of what, or satisfy the value proposition of whatever this campaign is seeking to do. So just to make sure that that's all linked in. And then online advertising. This is really our final slide, and so it's something that we wanted to talk about a little bit. It's something that we are seeing really take, the planet by storm. Let's be honest. When we look at the statistics around, non-sector specific digital advertising, we know that it's growing by billions of dollars, every few years, and really at the end of the day, we should have included another image on this slide around what the traditional model is. If we look at what an outbound kind of traditional marketing model looks to do from a tactical standpoint, it's what sometimes I've heard just recently, actually somebody referred to it as the spray and pray method, which I think is really funny. It's this kind of, okay, we're a charity, we know what our mission is, we need to get out in front of as many people as possible and hope that we hook them. So are we sending out, ad mail? Are we maybe having a television commercial or booking a radio spot or, putting up a Google ad and then hoping that it works? What we can do now with marketing, again, because of these sophisticated analytics functionalities, is really understand what messaging makes sense on which channel and for whom. And so using a combination of the tactics on the left, we can really start to hone in on building those personalized and value-added relationships with our prospects, constituents, and supporters. So I just want to speak through what these kind of, and you'll see the last one we just snuck in there because we always want you to be testing. But let me just kind of speak to what these first 4 bullets are, and there are so many different ways that they can be applied once you identify your objectives and audience. Your custom audience matching is something that we're seeing, it has to be done properly for sure, but we're seeing it be so successful in our sector. So this is, we'll have organizations call us and say, okay, we need to get this campaign out on Facebook. When we come back, we say, okay, in a new model, we've got 1 million different channels and 1 million different audiences. Let's use Facebook right. And I'm just focusing on Facebook right now because it's the biggest icon I can see from where I'm sitting right now. What a custom audience match does is say, okay, you've got a lot of really warm leads already in your database that maybe have never donated. So maybe this is your volunteer file, or maybe they have donated and they've lapsed, or maybe they donated last year and we want to make sure they do again. What we can do now with these platforms is actually take that list and export it as a CSV file and encrypt it, and then find ways to match it to actual social profiles. So now we're saying, okay, this is your audience. This is what your audience was going to be for direct mail. Let's make sure that this exact audience becomes your audience online and serve, concurrent or supporting messaging to them at the same time. Once we have a custom audience match, we can create a lookalike audience. So that's where you go back to the social profile and say, okay, hey Facebook, I've got this list of 1,000 donors. Can you find me 10,000 people that look exactly like these guys? And so what we're doing here is moving away from that traditional demographic targeting into something that's behavioral. All of these platforms, they collect a lot of data, and we have an opportunity to use our powers for good, not evil, because marketers in the corporate world are doing this work already. And so if we can say, hey Facebook, I know that you're keeping track of everybody's behavioral analytics. Can you use those behaviors to find people whose behaviors look like our current donors so that we are more likely to convert people to our mission or in this campaign? And that's kind of how points 1 and 3 really work together quite well. Remarketing is, once you have moved somebody through a marketing funnel and they're maybe haven't converted as a donor yet, but they're in the middle, here's our opportunity to have a two-way conversation with them. So remarketing is a fancy way of saying let's serve something again to the same people. So the example I always use for this guy is, and again, I always preface it with, let's use our powers for good, not evil, because I know how annoying these can be. And it's our job to ensure as organizations we're representing ourselves well, so we're not annoying people as well. Let me throw that in there. But remarketing, a good example is last winter, my partner and I wanted to go to, we bought tickets and we wanted to go to Mexico, and then I realized that I'd gained a little bit of weight and none of my shorts fit me, and it was the middle of winter in Canada and no stores were selling shorts. So I went online and I started looking for shorts, and then I decided I was cheap and I wasn't going to buy a pair of shorts, and I just cut off a pair of pants I have for the vacation. And then for probably 3 weeks, that pair of shorts followed me around, and then all of a sudden they went on sale, and whatever website I went to, there they were, and I eventually converted. If we know from traditional fundraising or traditional campaign work that sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 touch points before a person ever converts, here's our opportunity to use our tool sets to do just that and ensure that, that those offers don't just disappear if somebody doesn't decide immediately. I'm just taking a second to scroll through the questions here. Okay, so there's a question here about which tools you are using to match to the database and social media. These can be done, again, so sometimes we do this for clients, sometimes we train clients on how to do this. There are options to do this directly within your ad platform. So if you're a Google AdSense or AdWords using organization, or if you have taken the next step with Facebook and are using a Facebook Business Manager, it's a not super complicated process, but it is a process nonetheless to do that. And so you can do that direct. It's a bit of manual work between the database or your CRM and social media. And then the follow-up question is, do you get other names of leads? And the answer to that is no. So for all of this custom audience match work, there's no ability to ever collect or share personally identifiable information. So this is all done through encryption work and algorithm work. It's actually against the privacy policies of Facebook, Twitter, Google, really all of the big guys. It's kind of against their privacy policies to ever have a way to capture personally identifiable information, which I would argue is a good thing. As a marketer, it just makes things a little bit more complicated. We can identify at an aggregate level who our audiences are and test them, but we can never actually say, tell me where Susie lives. That would be a violation of a privacy policy there. Just double checking that there's no other questions. So hopefully that answered your question there. Conversion optimization, again, so these are one of the things, if you're running a paid marketing campaign, you have the opportunity to essentially never set it and forget it, but tell your ad platform, so to tell your Facebook Business Manager or your Google AdWords what your overall goal is. So if you are an organization that has online giving as an opportunity or as an option, here's where you can take a little piece of code from your ad platform and put it in the donation form. So you're really telling the ad platform, as the better you get, can you optimize to be even better? So if we're sending out our ads to 10,000 people per day and 100 of them are becoming donors, we know that those 100 over time likely have something in common with each other more so than they do with the larger 10,000. So can we, through that piece of code, can we tell the ad platform every time another donor comes in, start to look at commonalities and adjust your targeting in a way that focuses on the conversion that we've identified as being our goal. Just going to take one more second to look at the questions. We've only got a few more minutes left, so just going to run through them, and I think we've covered off most of them. And this is really our last piece of content for today. So, we'll put up the thank you slide, but we really want to think about a couple of things right now. We want to think about, how can we as organizations be as constituent or donor-centric as possible? And to do so means, to look at what we've done in the past and make decisions based on those supporters' behaviors and results, as opposed to what makes sense for the marketing department to do versus the fundraising department, or the annual or individual gifts officer versus the major gifts officer, or the volunteer team versus etc. It's really to start thinking high level, what are our objectives as an organization year round? How can holiday add some additional value to what we're doing year round? How can we start to think about holiday as a very strategic time to be in market, but how can we also link our holiday campaigns to what we're doing when it's not holiday, so that we're providing consistent, tailored, and properly funneled offers to our constituents every month of the year. Then we just talked about a couple of different tips that we wanted to make sure you didn't forget. And so everything from ensuring you have this culture of testing to sending out those last minute tax emails, but ensuring that you're consistent with best practices and things that work as you do so. Integrating, ensuring that your campaigns are reflective of your organization's diverse goals, leveraging your e-cards, really just seeing how you can be in as many channels that work for your constituents as possible so that you can reach those ultimate goals. So we might take a few seconds to see if there are any lingering questions coming in.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please type them in the comments box.
We had a couple of duplicate questions, so hopefully we were able to answer all of those. Oh. Sorry for the radio silence, we're just doing some quick reading. So the question I'm reading right now says, so with direct mailing, do you send an email before sending the envelope that would be similar look and similar, or do you use Facebook to send something? So both, and these are again things that we'd recommend testing. If you can't test, best practice is, you always want to be providing offers to your constituents in as many ways as possible that work for them. And so absolutely, we often, if we're talking holiday or otherwise, if you're sending direct mail to people who are on your email list, we'll often send a teaser or recommend sending a teaser email the week prior saying, hey, obviously, and much more exciting, you'll see that I'm not a copywriter here, but like, hey, we have, this brand new offer and it makes sense because this is our mission and this is important to you. Please keep an eye on your mailbox because there's an envelope coming your way where we'd like to share more. We've also tested doing the same thing after a campaign and saying, we haven't heard from you yet, but it's because it just landed in your mailbox yesterday, just hoping that you got it. We can do the same thing. I mean, that's one way to do it in email, but you can absolutely do that through custom audience matching on social media as well.
And then just to add to what Zach was saying, some clients have done or thanked their donors prior to their actual fundraising campaign, and that's been a successful tactic just in terms of seeing more of an uptake in terms of actual end-of-year donations. So that's another suggestion in terms of timing.
Perfect. One of the questions is for our contact info. You'll definitely get that as a follow-up. Tools, I think. Oh, there's something about Giving Tuesday there, sure. How do you integrate Giving Tuesday into your year-end campaign without overlapping your audience, or how do you simply use it as another way to connect? I love this question because there's no right answer. And the reason there's no right answer is Giving Tuesday, you can think of it the same way as, I know it's a little bit different, but I'll hopefully be able to link these two theoretically. Think of it the same way as, Twitter. And all of a sudden you have this campaign and you go, okay, but Twitter's here, we need to do something on Twitter because we have Twitter. That channel strategy, if that's the way we're approaching it, is something that we're being a bit premature with. What we need to do first is take a step back and look at our objectives and say, okay, are our objectives to use shareable content to generate buzz and donations on social media? If that's our overall objective or objective, kind of tactic, then we can say, okay, Giving Tuesday is going to have a lot of eyes on it. How does that tactic fit with Giving Tuesday? We've seen everything. There's a really cool, small and scrappy organization in Ottawa that did a very cool matching campaign. Again, super small organization. Doesn't have a lot of infrastructure and resources with, I think 1.5 staff. And last year for Giving Tuesday, they essentially, they started now. They went out to their supporters and they said, we want to have a $2,000 matching gift on Giving Tuesday. So can we find 20 current supporters who are willing to pledge in advance $100 and have them share their story about why they're donating $100? And then for Giving Tuesday, because their objective was to use social to do this work, or their tactical plan, they essentially every half hour a new donor was highlighted as to why they donated $100 for this matching gift. And through that, the objective for this small org was to raise another $2,000 through social media with people trying to match it, and they ended up raising much more than that. So again, I think it comes down to Giving Tuesday being an important, if you haven't already kicked off your holiday campaign by Giving Tuesday, you absolutely should. And incorporate it. But before you say what should we do for Giving Tuesday, I think it's what are we trying to achieve with this campaign, and then how does Giving Tuesday fit in? So we've got 2 more minutes, and I think we've covered off all the questions. You will be getting a survey in a second, which will give you the option to, answer some questions that we have, as well as provide any contact information if you'd like a follow-up. We'll be following up with a little thank you email, so you can get in touch with us as well. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day. Most of you stayed on for the whole time, which doesn't always happen. So that either means we were exciting, or we're at least more exciting than what you have waiting at your desk. So thank you for that.
Thanks for your time.
People can see you.